Hello and welcome. This is the second session of Reclaim Open, and we're so excited to be here and welcome Mary Isbell and Bill Quinn, who are our second presenters today for this session. So welcome to you both. We're so excited to have you with us. And we are in store for an amazing session. I love the title of this one, WonderCat. So I'm going to hand over to you now and let you take it away.
All right. Thank you, Maren. Thank you all for joining us. And we are excited to tell you about things. So I'm Mary Isbell. I'm an English professor at the University of New Haven.
And I'm Bill Quinn. I'm an instructional technologist at Marist University.
And we are excited to tell you about a tool that we've been building in Reclaim Cloud with guidance, much guidance from many people in the Reclaim community. We'd love your feedback, especially your suggestions on how we can make it better. To get started, let me describe briefly how we got here. I have recently come to terms with the fact that most of my students in my English courses don't really read the literature that I assign. I primarily teach literature in the core curriculum, so I rarely teach courses exclusively for English majors, but honestly, even when it's exclusively for English majors, students are efficient and they don't read anymore, sadly. So, or maybe they never did, I don't know. And so I've started to let students choose what they want to read within the parameters of a particular course. I wrote an openly licensed book called Searching for Wonder. Let me see if I can advance this slide. And this book includes strategies for teaching literature with student-selected texts, which has been really lovely. You can see the cover here. The book is in the Pressbooks directory. You can also see the cover of Angus Fletcher's Wonderworks on this same slide. This is the book that inspired this shift in my teaching. So in my first semester teaching with this approach, students were grateful for the option to choose, but they struggled to find what they wanted to read. Many defaulted to recommendations from Google, Goodreads, Instagram, BookTok, which immediately made me second guess my plan of setting aside my reading list. I knew I wanted students to encounter things outside their regular reading habits. In fact, I started to talk to students about a literature course as a chance to stretch themselves in this way, but with agency, right? And to do this, I realized I'd need to provide an alternative to these algorithmic recommender systems. So I started dreaming up a discovery tool, one that could link the novels, films, and games that students already enjoy to the works of literature crafted with similar techniques in the past. So I call these techniques narrative technologies because I like to play around with the idea that text on a page, that narrative in general does work. It does work on our brains. So for example, a student comes into my class raving about Jordan Peele's film Get Out, and they learn that the suspense that's making them experience curiosity is also at work in Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, Darwin's On the Origin of Species, and even Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I also wanted students in future courses to be able to see what students had chosen to read in my courses. My hunch was that it would be interesting for students to see that a student who came in loving The Perks of Being a Wallflower, as one student did with me last semester, who read it as a teenager, also chose to read Sally Rooney's Intermezzo during the semester and Stevenson's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I, at that moment, kind of was thinking a network graph would be ideal to sort of visualize the connections. I wanted to make it easy for students to share these choices and then visualize that data so others would want to peruse it. This has required learning many things I didn't know when this dream occurred to me. Relational data, linked open data, APIs. I knew people who knew about these things, and so I started asking questions.
So Mary reached out to me because she wanted to create a network graph of the relational data that her students were essentially working on and building. And while I have experience building networks before, I've never approached them as part of a live and ever-growing database. My background is not in computer science, it's also in English literature. And so most of my experience has been geared towards literary history, which conveniently lets me and other scholars sort of set parameters on what to select or leave out. And academic work often involves sort of creating clear boundaries for our research questions. Here, however, we knew that the data would ideally continue to grow. And rather than working on a thesis with evidence, we had to instead sort of anticipate how readers would want to engage with and how they would want to connect with others. So from a data visualization perspective, the interesting challenge for me was how to balance each user's connectivity with other users and experiences without overwhelming them with cluttered visualizations. And so 1 year in, we have a prototype. And we tried a handful of different visualizations, but ultimately stuck with 2 to start with, and then a 3rd to build next. So the network graph made the most sense as it lends itself to visualizing connectivity more than most methods. And we thought this would draw in first our students, but then other readers, and sort of encourage them to pick up another book when they finish the one they read. We thought the next important mode of connectivity and exploration we might encourage would be the use of a sort of world map of text. And our first step into doing this was asking students and readers to provide well, the QID or the ID for Wikidata, which Wikidata would provide us with geodata and coordinates for each text that readers could then sort of add to the database. Being able to see a map allows us to get a sense of where we and our readers get our literature. And by seeing the empty spaces in the map that we're sort of populating as we use this, we might be prompted to explore other literary traditions. And as Mary sort of alluded to, the next visualization that we'd like to build for sort of the next phase of this project would be a timeline. Once again, Wikidata is sort of very useful to us, and that it's also a community-built resource that has a lot of information that we are also interested in, and I think our students and readers would be, primarily publication dates and genres. So many of our students are surprised when they learn how old some narrative technologies experiences are, like suspense that Mary referenced. For many of them, older texts can be challenging because the language feels so archaic to them. But if they're able to anchor that language in a familiar experience, they might be more courageous in exploring older texts and gain confidence in their own reading and interpretations. Knowing that their favorite novels or movies can be situated in longer tradition also allows them to recontextualize a familiar text and experience it again in a new way. All of this, however, depends on readers and their willingness to create and share data that ultimately determines how we can structure it for them.
Yeah, and I want to explain a little bit about how we structure the data in WonderCat, because it's different, deliberately different than the kind of data collected about users in recommender systems. Also, recommender systems are often just keeping track of behavior. One of my goals is to help students think differently about their experiences with creative works. I want them to name the emotional experiences they have. And this is a big change in my thinking about how we teach literature, because, well, I'll just leave it at that. I want students to recognize that the same creative work will impact different people in different ways, and that's good, that they don't need to arrive at the right way of understanding a text. This is helpful because to build a relational database, we need a controlled vocabulary. If I want those nodes to work, then I need terms that are always used in the same way. So we've built a taxonomy of experiences with narrative, starting with all the terms that Angus Fletcher uses in his book Wonderworks. So that book, as I was reading it, I was like, let's just extract all of the data from this book and use that to get started, and then build it from there. And so I'll show you what we started with. This is on the front end of the WordPress site. That is the sort of prototype of WonderCat. I built this page by just making a table and putting every single word in the glossary and then hyperlinking to the archive page, because I was very new to doing this. But early in the semester, I would ask students to peruse this glossary, familiarize themselves with available terms. Because the glossary is pulled from the database, then they can click and they can see all of the things that have been categorized in that way inside the database. And that kind of hopefully encourages them to explore some of those works. So the next bit of data comes from the way I engage with students. So when a student writes about an experience with a creative work, I ask them to share the specific feature of the work that they think prompted their experience, and then try to identify the narrative technology or combination of narrative technologies that were used to create that feature. So this is kind of a dream for a literature professor, to be able to say, what did you think? Where did you get that from? And then what caused that? And that's the work of the class. And so when they get that together, the assignments are built around this work. The students actually create posts on a website which is built with OpenLab. So side note, we've got a presentation about OpenLab tomorrow that you should definitely check out. So they're writing these posts which are filled with narrative, but they also contain the basic data that can be submitted to WonderCat. I ask students to contribute to a spreadsheet throughout the semester, so that they can see, as we're working, all collaboratively reading different things, kind of what's emerging. And you can see like a little snippet of this. And this is like still how I work. Even though WonderCat exists over here, there's like this just for us spreadsheet that we're building to kind of be able to sort by curiosity and see how many students in the class have reported having that experience and others. And so then I want to point out here something we'll describe in greater detail in just a minute, but you can see in the spreadsheet that there's a space for students to propose new experience and technology terms. And many did in this semester when I was using this. In a single semester, students proposed 20 new experience terms, 30 new technology terms. You can see in here that the terms that they were coming up with are really interesting and nuanced. And I was really pleased with how this kind of propelled their analysis of literature. And these weren't English majors who were doing this work. One of the things we're working on right now, and it's hard to think through, is the best way to manage those proposed terms, because we want this glossary that's super helpful when students are just getting familiarized with something. So how to bring those in is something we're thinking about. So this past May, for the first time, WonderCat accepted submissions from students. We went from 2 member nodes, so it was Angus and me who had put in experiences at the beginning, to 10 member nodes. So not all of my students contributed, but those who wanted to, we now had 8 new members of WonderCat. One of the things we're working on right now is the best way, all of a sudden, our network went from, wow, a network graph, yay, to this is kind of overwhelming. So I'll let Bill speak to that.
Yeah, so early on, Mary and I agreed that we wanted to avoid sort of reinventing the wheel of most recommendation systems. And we see that these recommendation systems are designed to, in some ways, remove user agency and encourage sort of an unmediated consumption. But without some limits, it's easy to see how unwieldy most visualizations can become. A network graph with even a few hundred nodes can quickly become a rat's nest, which becomes sort of indecipherable for many people. So we kind of asked ourselves, how then can we provide a visualization that represents everyone while still being understandable? Again, most recommendation systems seem to handle this by curating the most popular choices, or if not by popularity, by some other metric that's often withheld from the user's decisions and choices. For us, we want to maintain the centrality of the reader's experience. So for that to happen, we have to give them some controls on how to engage with the community's data. The simplest way to do this is by using filters. And sometimes the most inclusive technology is the simplest. This allows readers to telescope in and out of the data by setting their own limits. So if a reader wants to zoom into their own data and their own contribution and gradually and cautiously sort of explore outward, then that should be an option. If they want to let the total mass of all the community's data and input wash over them, then that should be an option too. Also, I should say our goal with this project is not to distance ourselves or the thing that we're creating from the readers, but to be in their company. And that makes it easier to sort of listen to what they want. And if we get something wrong, we can simply change it. The challenge for us then is less how to optimize our visualizations for some ideal user, but instead how to give each reader control over the visualizations while still making it usable and responsive.
Yeah. And I should say that, the story we've told so far, and we're kind of giving you the rundown, and then we have lots of places where we want to ask for your feedback. But what we've done so far is really in the classroom, and it's a tool built for use pedagogically in the classroom. I wanted this tool and I love this tool. But we are designing WonderCat so it's easy for anyone to contribute, because we started to see this as this potential other thing that could exist and actually create really interesting opportunities for academics to engage with everyone. And so that is what we're thinking through now. And we've thought about some priorities as we manage this, because we're kind of like sitting on this, I think, really exciting idea with tons of possibilities, and there's decisions to make constantly. And so we've been talking a lot lately about what really are the most important things for us. And so the first is, yes, it is a tool in the classroom, but we want to make something that will be engaging for everyone, that will encourage everyone to be involved. We have really thought a lot about how anyone could make an account. We don't have it set up that way yet because we're trying to prepare for that when anyone can make an account. And we also want to make sure that we're respecting shared data. So we're very alive to the notion of enshittification, and we consider this a project that is offering alternatives that don't treat user data the way most platforms do. So we want to make sure that both people can add data, can take it back out, can modify the data that they put in, and also that no one else has an opportunity to misuse data that our members have shared. And finally, keep it simple. What we mean by that is not so much that we want the front end to be so spare that people can understand it super easily. That is that we want to weigh in, but we also want, like Bill was talking about, for you to be able to kind of get into the full nitty-gritty complexity of the data as it grows. What we more mean is, how can we make it computationally as simple as possible so that we can afford to run it as it grows, so that it doesn't become unwieldy to manage, that it's just scalable, basically. And so as people who are just sort of learning about this, we are we know that all of you probably have wonderful suggestions for us to try to accomplish some of these things. So in the time we have left, we want to share realizations that we've made as we've been building WonderCat. So as I mentioned earlier, many members of the Reclaim community have helped us get to where we are right now, and we know that there's much more to learn from this community. We have a series of slides where we share our realizations. It's been really important for me to narrate this sort of, I did not know any of this, and now I am learning these things. And so this is kind of how I've structured it, because that's really exciting to me, and I want other people to see that. And if you have ideas, so I'm hearing from Maren that there's lots of great comments in the chat and questions. So we're excited to hear your thoughts. We're going to kind of guide you to give us advice at certain points. So the first realization that was very exciting to me is that relational data can be managed with WordPress. And when I first described this project, when I was describing it to a colleague who was like, I know how to manage like relational data, he suggested that we get started with a Postgres database. And so I got a little bit stuck trying to find an open source way to allow anyone to establish an account, contribute experiences to a Postgres database, and be able to get back into it. I remember asking Taylor about this at one point. See, Taylor and Ed Beck have been very helpful in my thinking on this. And I remember saying, like, I think I heard somewhere that WordPress is a database. And he said, yes, Mary, yes, it is. And he introduced me to ACF, and I haven't looked back, even though right after he introduced me to ACF, everything kind of like blew up around the controversy surrounding ACF and WordPress. Anyway, I use that to create custom post type, which is our sort of user experience with narrative, and the custom taxonomy. So we are building this in WordPress. What we want feedback on is, we're still sort of sorting this out. Right now, anyone can go and see the JSON file from our database. We're wondering, should we be locking that down? Should we make it so that only we can access it in that way? Because the other question we have is, how can we help members download their data. So if a member puts a lot of things in there, loves that they can curate their reading experiences inside our database, but then decides they want to take it all out, we want to be able to give that to them so they can do something else with it. And that is not a thing that we know how to do right now. So Maren, as we kind of share these things, if there's any comments where people are like, yes, absolutely do it this way, then you can shout those out.
Definitely will do. There's lots of love, lots of people really interested in how you're learning about that, and plenty of kudos for you, Bill, and everybody involved. So okay. I'll keep a close eye, and thanks everybody for playing along in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. And I couldn't manage, so I don't see the chat right now, but I don't know if I can handle it. So thank you, Maren, for like piping up whenever there's something that somebody wants to bring in. So the next realization we want to talk about, I'll let Bill speak to.
As I mentioned sort of earlier, we are at a place right now where we can figure out how to do things and bring in data from different places and connect it, do different sort of programming stuff on it. But I'm not aware of sort of best practices. And one thing we spent I think most of our summer months working through was the network graph really slowed down the site. I think at one point it was taking like a minute to load, which would really prevent, I think, anybody from using it. And so we have, what I hope is a simple question with simple answers is what's the sort of best recommendation in creating a pipeline so that we can, again, respect everyone's sort of data but making it still usable and wieldy. We want to make it possible so that if somebody really wanted to, they could look at everything all at once, but maybe that's something they opt into, and maybe we do sort of provide a simpler, sort of more curated step. But this is something I'm personally just pretty ignorant about, and I would love to know sort of what are the best options. Is JavaScript, right now we're running Shiny, specifically R, so is JavaScript a sort of snappier and faster version of this? What do other people do? And we would just love sort of recommendations and suggestions.
Maren, what are you seeing?
Well, lots of love, as I said, and Tom Woodward said, free to JSON. So I think people, really appreciate your open approach. And we had a really helpful comment from Taylor, who, obviously also mentioned that it depends a little bit on what the data is that is in the file. So if there's, personal or private data, then, maybe to consider, does that need to be public, or can some stuff be separated out so that all the things that are, in the Shiny application, are things that people should be able to access. So, but there's lots of interest. I've posted the links that you've shared. So if you've just joined and tuned in, I know many of you are watching live right now, check out the links to WonderCat and Shiny WonderCat that Mary and Bill have kindly shared. And yeah, I'll come back if there's more comments.
Okay, yeah, and mainly what we would like to say is we're putting a lot of questions out there. Basically, if Tom's here, yay, thank you, Tom. Already have learned so much from Tom and Taylor and Ed. We also welcome others to let us know if they're interested in helping us with this, because every single new person that we meet helps us figure out a new way to approach this. And this can get as big a group as there is interest. So please reach out to us if you want to get involved. So the next realization I want to talk about is the Wikidata realization we had, which was so wonderful. This was like last fall, and we were trying to think, if we're going to let people supply the title of the creative work in WordPress, I don't want to make that input moment really painful for them. I don't want to make them go track down bibliographic. And how are we going to make sure that when we're talking about Hamlet, we're talking about Shakespeare's play as opposed to the film version of this year or this year or this year? And we at first thought about OCLC data. We thought about library data that would constrain things. But right around the same time, there was a wiki education training on Wikidata, and Will Kent just like blew my mind. And all of a sudden, Wikidata was the solution. Having people look up the QID for the creative work they're entering wound up being brilliant, because games and more contemporary things that you can't find easily in WorldCat was just already in, it was already in Wikidata. Almost everything that I entered from Angus's book, which was like 200 texts, there were 2 that weren't in Wikidata already. So that was really exciting. What you can see here is me learning how to revise the Wikidata for Mrs. Dalloway. I added some properties because I wanted to be able to pull those properties into different dreams we have of visualizing things. And so you can see the version history there. You can also see something that came from the map that Bill created. So when we were able to map what was in our database, we saw all of a sudden that looking for Alaska, which a student entered, showed up in Japan on the map. And so I went and looked at the Wikidata, and I was able to correct that because that was kind of errant information. And that brings up this question for us, which is in that sort of pipeline of how we bring Wikidata together with our WordPress database and visualize it. We want to figure out the right way to make sure that when someone looks at our visualizations, they're looking at them being rendered with the most up-to-date Wikidata. And we're sort of toying with the idea of making, we did this initially and then we moved away from it, but I think it's probably the smart thing to do is to pull the Wikidata into our WordPress database so that actually the front end of the WordPress site can visualize full relational data, and we can do something with it over in Shiny or other kinds of network graph visualizations. But if we're doing that, then we're pulling it in at the point that the user experience post is created. What becomes our hook for an update to that data if it gets updated over here in Wikidata? And so we're open to thoughts, and anyone feels like they have expertise in this area, please let us know. Okay, so we know that we're not going to get through all of these, but we'll just go basically until our time runs out. Maren, sounds good? Did you have anything you wanted to throw in?
Oh, yes, I was just going to say there's plenty of discussion in the chat. So I think this is a really rich conversation. So maybe something to revisit, but let's keep going. We've got 2 more minutes.
Everybody just let's have a big Zoom session after the conference, and you can all tell us and talk to us a little bit more directly. Okay, so the exciting thing that I'm going to fit in right before we end is that it's really important to us that the glossaries, they're going to be huge, especially if we think about reaching people who aren't in the classroom. They need to be able to understand this is the range of experience. This is what I mean when I say experience. And this is what I mean when I say narrative technology. And we can have a controlled vocabulary, but I've learned pedagogically that it's really beneficial when students can propose those terms. And so Tom Woodward has been really helpful to me this summer in learning about how I can use Gravity Forms and Gravity Flow to manage new member proposals of terms. And so I'm kind of overwhelmed by the possibilities at this point, but it does seem like all of this is very possible. And I'm still sorting out like how to incorporate new terms without making the glossary unwieldy, because every nuanced variation on a narrative technology isn't necessarily something you want to see when you first look at the glossary. So WordPress, thankfully, has parent and child, the notion of parent and child terms in their sort of basic infrastructure. And we're kind of leaning on that. We're thinking now about, we have primary terms and we have related terms or sort of variations. And you can look at those if you go over here, but the primary terms are what you see at first. And the other thing you can see here is the form that kind of using conditional logic allows you to say, I want to enter a new term, and then you can propose it. That's going to trigger something that leads to sort of an editorial decision-making process and communication with the member who proposes that term. Maren, what are you thinking? Or are we out of time?
We are unfortunately out of time.
Okay.
And I know you guys were wanting to keep it right up to the end so we can fit in as much as possible. So I just want to say a big thank you. There's so much discussion happening in the chat. And I know you gave a shout out to Ed Beck earlier.
Yeah.
Ed is actually up next. He's the next session starting in about 30 seconds. So we are going to ask you all to, show appreciation virtually for Mary and Bill. Thank you both so much for coming. You rock Reclaim Open. And I really hope the conversations can continue on the Discord chat. And thanks so much for sharing this wonderful project with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Much,
Thank you,
Mary.
everyone. Take care.
Nom nom nom.